How does it feel to be judged by the color of your skin? Naomi Greer had learned to live with it, until the day she stepped into a luxury car dealership in Miami. Dressed to impress, she was met with glances of disbelief and cold indifference. To them, she was just another black woman, out of place in their world of high-end cars and exclusivity. But Naomi wasn't here to blend in. She was here to turn their assumptions upside down. And before they knew it, they'd wish they hadn't underestimated her. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because that encourages us to bring you more powerful stories like this. The midday Miami heat shimmered off the polished hood of a midnight blue Aston Martin as Naomi Greer stepped onto the dealership lot. Her heels clicked against the white marble tile, a rhythm both sharp and assured. From the tailored cream pantsuit to the patent leather briefcase in her left hand, everything about her presence said money, power, control. But the receptionist didn't flinch. From behind a spotless white counter, the young woman glanced up, briefly, then returned her gaze to her computer, fingers tapping like Naomi wasn't even there. Naomi didn't blink. She'd seen that look before, once outside a courtroom, once in a country club's foyer, countless times in high-rise elevators where she was the only black woman not in uniform. "I have an appointment," Naomi said, voice smooth as silk and twice as sharp. 1 o'clock. Greer. The woman's eyes lifted again, this time holding longer. She hesitated, a twitch in her brow, a moment's pause. Then the fake smile arrived, forced, paper-thin. "Oh, right," the receptionist said, typing like she'd just remembered how. Can I see some ID?" Naomi arched one brow. "Excuse me. It's just, we've had issues. People saying they have appointments. But..." Naomi cut her off with a slow breath. "Not today." Behind the glass wall to her right, a salesman in a tight charcoal suit was laughing with two white clients, likely hedge fund kids with more debt than assets. No one asked them for ID. She leaned in, her voice low but lethal. "Call the manager. Now." And just like that, the air in the lobby shifted. Naomi didn't need to raise her voice. She was the voice. The kind that won cases in federal court. The kind that had cross-examined billionaires and walked out with settlements that made the news. But in this moment, in this place, she was something else. She was a black woman being profiled. Again. And this time, she wasn't walking away silent. A minute passed. Then 2. Naomi didn't move. She stood centered in the lobby, back straight, gaze pinned calmly to the receptionist who now couldn't stop fidgeting. The click of her acrylics against the mouse, the shallow breaths, they gave it away. She knew she'd messed up. But it wasn't fear of Naomi. It was fear of who might be watching. Glass walls, after all, meant no secrets. Finally, a tall man in a navy blazer emerged from the back office. Early 40s, slicked back hair, and a practiced smile that screamed country club charm. "Good afternoon, he said, approaching with a hand extended. "I'm Darren, General Sales Manager here. How can I help?" Naomi gave him nothing. No smile. No handshake. "I'm Naomi Greer," she said. "You were supposed to meet me at 1. Instead, your staff asked for my ID like I was here to steal tires." Darren blinked. His smile flickered, barely, but she caught it. "Oh," he stammered. "I'm sure it was just standard protocol. Happens all the time." "It doesn't," she cut in, her voice clipped. "And you know it." He cleared his throat, looked over at the receptionist, then back. "Look, Ms. Greer, I want to apologize if there was any misunderstanding. We value all our clients." "Interesting," Naomi said, stepping forward. "Because I referred 3 of your clients. All white. All men. None of them were asked for ID. None waited in the lobby. And certainly none were mistaken for liars." Darren's posture stiffened. The lobby, suddenly quieter. One of the salesmen across the room looked up, paused mid-pitch to his client. The tension spread like smoke. "Would you like to come to my office?" Darren offered, eyes darting. "We can discuss the details of the vehicle you're interested in, privately." Naomi tilted her head. What I want is transparency. Right here. Right now. For a moment, Darren just stood there, caught between corporate decorum and a rising PR disaster. He could feel it now. The tide turning. Naomi unlatched her briefcase and pulled out a slim leather folder. Inside, pristine documents, financials, vehicle specs, dealership communications, all printed and time-stamped. All in order. I came here to close on the DB12, she said calmly. Full payment. No loan. No negotiation. But now, I'm reconsidering. Because money shouldn't talk louder than dignity. Darren paled. And Naomi knew, this was only the beginning. Darren hesitated for just a beat too long. His hand, still hovering, dropped to his side as Naomi's calm gaze pinned him in place. The moment stretched, thick with anticipation. He could feel the weight of the entire dealership in that silence, and it wasn't a weight he was used to carrying. I didn't mean to imply, he began, but Naomi interrupted him with a soft, almost imperceptible shake of her head. No, you didn't mean to, she said. But that's not the point, is it? Her voice was even, polite, but the sting behind her words cut sharper than a blade. Darren blinked again, now entirely off balance. Ms. Greer, I can assure you, this isn't the experience we intend for our customers. I'll personally make sure we correct any misunderstanding. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some measure of control. How about I show you the car? The one you're interested in? I think it'll change your mind about all this. Naomi kept her eyes locked on his, silent for a long moment. She already knew the car. She knew the specs, the numbers, the history. She'd done her homework long before stepping through the door. This wasn't about the car anymore. It was about something else entirely. Something deeper. That's not what I'm here for, Naomi replied. I'm here because of how I was treated. I shouldn't have to negotiate my worth simply to be acknowledged as a customer. Darren blinked rapidly, then looked to his staff, his expression faltering. Of course, he stammered. He made a visible effort to swallow his discomfort and took a deep breath. But we'd be happy to make this right. Just let me work something out. How about I offer you an exclusive package? Discounts on any future services. Additional warranty. Naomi raised her hand, silencing him. I don't want your discounts, Darren. What I want is for this dealership to recognize that I am here, I am worthy of respect, and my money is no different from anyone else's. She paused, letting the last words sink in. The hum of the air conditioning buzzed too loudly in the heavy silence, but nothing could drown out the quiet power in her voice. I'm going to give you one more chance, Naomi continued, her tone hardening like the steel frame of a luxury car. I'll go ahead and purchase the DB12, if you can promise me that no one here will ever question my right to be a customer, again. Darren's eyes flicked to the side, his brain scrambling. The clock was ticking now, and every second felt like it counted against him. All right, he said, voice steady but with a tight edge. We'll make sure that never happens again. You have my word. Naomi's lips curled into a smile, but it was one that didn't reach her eyes. You better hope that word is worth something, she said, before turning on her heel and heading toward the display room. Darren stood there, mouth open, a mix of frustration and realization settling in his chest. The deal, for all his attempts to smooth it over, was slipping away from him. And this time, it wasn't just about a sale. It was about something he could no longer ignore. Naomi's footsteps were measured, deliberate, as she moved toward the pristine DB12 in the showroom. The polished silver of the car gleamed under the sharp lights, a stark contrast to the storm that was brewing beneath her calm exterior. Each step carried a weight that Darren couldn't ignore, but he felt paralyzed, unsure how to fix the crack in his carefully maintained facade. He trailed behind her, unsure of what to say next. The ball was no longer in his court. She paused in front of the car, her fingers brushing lightly across the hood as if she were inspecting something much more than the surface. Her gaze was distant, and yet, the power in her presence was undeniable. She wasn't just any customer. Not in the way Darren had imagined when he first saw her walk in. This is a beautiful car, Naomi murmured, her voice almost wistful, as if the words were meant for herself rather than Darren. It's a symbol, isn't it? A symbol of success, of power, of being seen. Darren didn't answer, unable to. The air felt thick, every movement of his making the atmosphere more suffocating. There was something about Naomi, something that made his every word feel like it might be the wrong one. She turned toward him suddenly, eyes narrowing slightly, as if she had been waiting for him to catch up with the conversation. "You sell status here, Darren," she said, her voice sharp now. "You sell the idea that this car represents something. But do you know what it really represents? What people like me see when they look at it?" She gave him no time to respond. "It's not about the car, Darren. It's about what it takes to be allowed into that world. A world where people like me are invisible until we step up and demand to be seen." Her words hit like a punch. Darren swallowed hard, his throat dry, but Naomi wasn't done. "I don't need to buy a car to prove anything to anyone," she continued, her eyes now locked on his. "But you? You need to decide which side you want to be on." Darren opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. The weight of her gaze anchored him in place, and suddenly, he understood. This was no longer a negotiation over the car. This was a lesson in recognition, in equality, and Naomi wasn't about to let him walk away without learning it. "The way you handle this moment, Darren," Naomi added with finality, her voice cool, controlled, "will say everything about you, about your dealership, and whether or not I trust you with my business." The silence that followed was a deafening reminder that the power in the room had shifted. And it was Naomi who held it now. The silence lingered like an uncomfortable guest that refused to leave. Naomi's words settled over Darren like a heavy blanket, stifling his usual bravado. For the first time, he was acutely aware of how small he had become in this space. This wasn't about selling a car. It was about something far bigger. Something that cut deeper than he had ever imagined. He wanted to respond. Wanted to give some polished, rehearsed line that would smooth over the tension. But all he could muster was a weak, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "No, Darren," Naomi interrupted, her voice low but firm. "You don't get to apologize. Not here, not now. You've already done the damage, and no amount of empty words will fix it." Darren's stomach churned. Her gaze never wavered, and it was almost as though she could see through him, dissecting every layer of his defensiveness, every excuse he'd ever made for his actions. She wasn't just standing in front of him anymore. She was standing for every person like her who had been ignored, dismissed, and forced to prove their worth at every turn. Naomi took a step forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing with the finality of her decision. She reached for her phone, tapping a few keys before turning it toward him. The screen glowed with a message she'd typed earlier, a message Darren couldn't ignore. "I took the liberty of sending a note to your dealership's corporate office," Naomi said. "I'm detailing this experience, your behavior, and the way I was treated. You see, Darren, it's not just about me. It's about what this dealership stands for, or rather, what it refuses to acknowledge. If this is how you treat potential customers like me, then I'll be sure to let others know exactly what this brand represents." She let the words hang in the air like an unspoken challenge. She wasn't just threatening to walk away. She was threatening to expose him. To expose them. And with it, the possibility that their brand could suffer the same fate as so many others that failed to live up to their promises of diversity, inclusion, and respect. Darren felt the blood rush to his face, a mixture of embarrassment and something far worse, fear. He wasn't afraid of Naomi. He was afraid of what she could do. What the world could do when people like her finally refused to be ignored. "Please, Naomi," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. I never intended to treat you that way. I didn't think." Naomi didn't smile. She didn't soften. She just stood there, looking at him with the clarity of someone who knew exactly what they were worth and wouldn't accept anything less. "You never thought," she echoed, her tone cutting. "And that's the problem, Darren. You never thought about me. About what I would have to go through just to be treated as an equal." Her eyes locked on his once more, and Darren knew, in that moment, that this wasn't just about a missed sale. This was about the beginning of something far greater. "Fix this," Naomi said, her voice steady, unwavering. "Or I'll make sure the world knows how you treat people like me." With that, she turned and walked toward the door, leaving Darren standing in the showroom, his mind racing, his heart pounding. He had one last chance to make things right. One final opportunity to decide where he stood in the face of something bigger than a car deal. And as Naomi's figure disappeared through the glass doors, he realized she was right. It wasn't just a car she was after. It was respect. The hum of the dealership seemed distant now, replaced by the thumping of Darren's own pulse in his ears. He stared at the spot where Naomi had stood moments before, her words hanging in the air like a challenge, a test he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The emails, the corporate memos, the meetings, they all ran through his mind in a blur. He'd been riding the comfortable wave of privilege, the unspoken assurances that people like Naomi wouldn't rock the boat. But she had, and now he was left to deal with the aftermath. Darren's gaze shifted to his desk, the familiar routine of numbers, spreadsheets, and sales projections suddenly feeling insignificant. He didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear: he couldn't ignore her. He couldn't dismiss her. Naomi had done something to him that no customer ever had. She had forced him to confront the systems he had been complicit in, the attitudes that had been ingrained in him without his even realizing. For a moment, he thought of calling her back, begging her to reconsider her decision. But that voice, the one Naomi had shown him so clearly, told him it was too late for empty promises. He had to prove that he was willing to change, to be better than what he had shown her. He couldn't simply apologize anymore. Not when his actions had been so steeped in ignorance. He had to act. Grabbing his phone, he quickly drafted an email to the corporate office. He wasn't sure if it would be enough, but it was a start, a step toward acknowledging what Naomi had made him see. He didn't know if it would fix everything, but for the first time in years, Darren felt like he was actually doing something that mattered. Subject: immediate action needed, discriminatory treatment incident to corporate leadership. Dear corporate leader's name. I am writing to inform you of a troubling incident that occurred today at our dealership. A potential client, Ms. Naomi Greer, was subjected to discriminatory treatment by a member of our sales team. I deeply regret this interaction and believe it is imperative we address this situation immediately. I am committed to ensuring that this issue is handled with the seriousness it deserves. I will personally be taking the following steps to address the situation, including 1. A full internal review of our staff training on diversity and inclusion. 2. Immediate conversations with all employees involved to discuss proper conduct and accountability. 3. A personal apology to Ms. Greer for the disrespectful treatment she received. I understand this is only the beginning of what will be a challenging but necessary process. I ask for your full support in holding our dealership accountable to the highest standards of fairness and respect. Sincerely, Darren, last name, position. With a final glance at the email, Darren hit send. He had no illusions that this was the end. This was the start of a new chapter for him, one that would require him to dig deeper, to listen more, and to confront uncomfortable truths. Naomi sat in her office, her fingers resting lightly on the keys of her laptop, staring at the email notification that had just popped up in her inbox. It was from Darren. She hadn't expected him to act so quickly. The message was formal, almost too neat. It was clear that Darren had heard her, but the question remained: would he actually do something about it? Or would this be another empty promise, just another way to placate her for the moment? Naomi clicked open the email, reading it carefully, her mind racing as the words sank in. She hadn't expected such a direct acknowledgement. Darren's words were professional, but there was something about the tone that caught her attention, a sense of urgency that hadn't been present in their earlier interactions. It wasn't just about the apology anymore. It was about what he was committing to: internal reviews, staff training, and a personal apology. She could sense his genuine frustration with what had happened, maybe even guilt. But Naomi wasn't ready to let her guard down. Words were just words. Action was what mattered. She'd seen the corporate jargon before, heard the promises that fell flat. Change couldn't just come from an email. It had to come from a shift in the culture, a willingness to challenge the deep-seated biases that had been in place long before she walked into that dealership. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. She could respond with a simple thank you. That would be polite. But polite wasn't the goal here. She needed to push further, to challenge Darren to hold himself and his team accountable. This wasn't a negotiation for her. This was about principle. This was about showing him that being nice wasn't enough anymore. There needed to be a reckoning. She typed quickly, her fingers moving with purpose as the words came to her. Subject, immediate action needed, discriminatory treatment incident. Dear Darren, thank you for your email. It's reassuring to see that you've acknowledged the situation and taken immediate steps to address the issue. However, I must be clear, actions speak louder than words. I hope you understand that the real work starts now. I will be monitoring the actions your team takes in the coming weeks, and I expect transparency in these efforts. A public commitment to change, not just a few internal memos, is what will truly move the needle. Let's schedule a follow-up meeting soon to ensure that your company is following through with the necessary reforms. Sincerely, Naomi Greer. She hit send, her breath catching slightly as she leaned back in her chair. This wasn't just about her. It was about every person of color who had ever been treated this way, every black professional who had ever walked into a room and been judged for the color of their skin. This was bigger than just the dealership. It was about changing the system. Naomi closed her laptop, a quiet resolve settling over her. She wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Naomi stood before the dealership, the glowing chrome of luxury cars surrounding her like a cold, mechanical jungle. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement, but Naomi's presence illuminated the space in a way the cars could never. Her jaw clenched as she watched the sales team, their eyes flicking to her occasionally, never quite meeting hers. They didn't know what they were dealing with. She had expected the silence. The quiet tension that made everything feel just a little too tight, a little too controlled. It was the same silence that greeted black professionals everywhere they went. Silent assumptions, quiet barriers, unspoken judgments. Naomi had worked in this city long enough to know when she was being sized up. She wasn't just a lawyer today. She wasn't just a professional. She was a black woman in a luxury car dealership. And in this space, that was a statement that had the power to rattle people. But it would also be her strength. The salesperson, a tall man with dark hair neatly combed back, stepped forward. Naomi had already noticed the small shake in his hands as he adjusted his suit jacket. "Can I help you?" he asked, though the hesitation in his voice suggested he didn't quite believe she could afford what she was looking at. Naomi didn't answer immediately. Instead, she surveyed the cars on the showroom floor, her gaze lingering on a sleek, midnight black sedan that gleamed in the light. Her fingers brushed the sleek surface, feeling the coolness of it beneath her touch, as though it held the promise of something more than just transportation. It represented power, prestige, a life she was entitled to as much as anyone else in the room. "I'm interested in that one," Naomi finally said, her voice calm and deliberate. "The black sedan." The salesperson stiffened. "Ah, yes, a fine choice. It's one of our high-end models. Would you like to take a look inside?" Naomi nodded, her gaze sharp as she noticed the slight shift in his posture. He was wary now, sizing her up again. He wasn't used to seeing someone like her, someone who belonged here, someone who wasn't fazed by the silence. He led her to the car, fumbling with the keys before unlocking the door. Naomi slid into the driver's seat, her fingers running over the leather, the smoothness grounding her. This was where she belonged, in control, in a space where others thought they could keep her out. "Would you like to take it for a test drive?" the salesman asked, his voice tentative now. There was no challenge left in his tone, only a resignation Naomi recognized. "No," she said, turning toward him with a steady gaze. "I've already made up my mind." The man opened his mouth to say something but hesitated. Naomi noticed the subtle flicker of discomfort on his face, the way his eyes darted away from hers. She could see the calculation running through his mind. He didn't know how to deal with a black woman who wasn't intimidated by his discomfort, who wasn't backing down. "Is there something you'd like to ask me?" she pressed, leaning forward, her eyes narrowing in a subtle challenge. The silence thickened between them, and Naomi knew that if she didn't break it, he would. He had to say something, anything. It was the only way he could regain some semblance of control in this exchange. Finally, he spoke, his words strained but clear. I wasn't expecting someone like you to be interested in a car like this." Naomi's eyes flicked over to the salesman, a flash of realization and quiet fury in her gaze. "Someone like me?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "What exactly does that mean?" The man stammered, looking for an excuse, but it was too late. Naomi wasn't interested in his apologies or justifications. She knew exactly what he meant, what people like him always meant. She had faced that judgment her whole life. She stood up from the car, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she walked toward him with deliberate steps. Every inch of her presence screamed confidence, power. Her identity was no longer up for negotiation. "I'm someone who's worked hard for everything I've earned," Naomi said, her voice carrying the weight of years of struggle, resilience, and triumph. "I'm someone who belongs in spaces like this, and you're going to treat me with the respect I deserve." The man's face turned red, and he opened his mouth to respond, but Naomi didn't give him the chance. She raised her hand to silence him. "Don't," she said simply. "This conversation is over." Turning on her heel, Naomi made her way toward the door, the sound of her heels echoing in the stillness. She had made her point, loud and clear. As she reached the door, she glanced back at the salesman one last time. His eyes were wide, his face flushed with the realization that he had misjudged her in the worst possible way. Naomi let out a slow, satisfied breath before pushing open the door and stepping out into the warm Miami air. She had won. The space had been hers all along. Naomi stepped into the warm Miami air, the door of the luxury dealership closing softly behind her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but not from nerves. From victory. The sunlight was still bright but soft as it dipped below the skyline, painting the city in hues of orange and pink. Naomi paused for a moment, taking in the scene, the busy street, the bustling shops, the ocean breeze. Miami, her city, her home. And she was still here, walking tall, despite the way the world had tried to make her shrink. She could feel the eyes of the salespeople following her. A mixture of disbelief, confusion, and maybe even shame. They had seen something they weren't used to. A black woman who had not only stepped into their space but had taken control of it without asking for permission. As she made her way down the sidewalk, Naomi pulled out her phone, glancing at a text that had come through during the encounter. It was from her law office, a reminder of the work she had to return to. The thought of heading back to her office, to her colleagues who respected her, brought her a small measure of comfort. But what she had just experienced would linger. It wasn't just about a car. It was about the way people expected her to shrink and apologize for existing. She clicked open her phone's messaging app and quickly typed out a reply to her assistant, confirming her meeting later in the afternoon. The message sent, she tucked the phone back into her bag, but not before hearing the faintest click of a message alert. Her brow furrowed as she saw a notification from her lawyer friend, Denise. She opened it, expecting a quick update on a case they had been working on together. "Denise, just heard about the situation at the dealership. Are you okay?" Naomi stopped in her tracks. Her finger hovered over the screen. For a moment, she considered not responding. She had been prepared for the microaggressions, but someone had already spread word about the incident. She couldn't decide if that was a good thing or a bad one. "Naomi, it was fine. Took care of it. Not a problem anymore." Her thumb hovered, and she added a few more words before hitting send. "Naomi, it's just a reminder. Some people think they own the space, but I'm not shrinking for anyone." A few seconds later, the reply came. "Denise, that's what I love about you. You make them see what they refuse to." Naomi smiled, the warmth of her friend's words hitting her right in the chest. But even as she read the message, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the moment wasn't over. It wasn't over because she knew this wouldn't be the last time she faced this kind of discrimination. As Naomi continued walking, she passed by an outdoor cafe, a group of young professionals seated around a table, laughing and drinking iced coffees. They seemed so at ease, so carefree. Naomi glanced over at them, a tightness forming in her chest. They didn't see her. Not really. To them, she was invisible, an outsider, someone who didn't belong in the same spaces as them. And yet, she had just owned one of those spaces. Her steps were confident, but there was a lingering sense of discomfort. Would that be the case every time she walked into a luxury space? Would the world ever stop questioning her right to be there? But then, a thought occurred to her. Naomi had no intention of letting this moment pass. She was done with quietly accepting what people thought she could do or where she could go. The power to change that, whether in a courtroom, a dealership, or any other space, was in her hands. As she walked toward her car parked just down the block, she spotted a familiar figure approaching. Her colleague and fellow attorney, Rachel, waved from the sidewalk. "Naomi, wait up!" Rachel called, jogging toward her. Rachel was a few years younger than Naomi, but they had bonded quickly after Naomi joined the firm. Rachel's fiery passion for social justice matched Naomi's, and the two of them often exchanged war stories about the cases they were fighting, but also the battles they faced outside the office. "What's going on?" Naomi asked, slowing her pace. Rachel's eyes were wide, and there was a look of surprise on her face. "I heard what happened at the dealership." "Word travels fast, hey?" she said with a smile that tried to mask the tension. "You all right?" Naomi tilted her head slightly, narrowing her eyes. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady. "But you know what? I'm done hiding. Done making excuses for why I don't fit the mold they've built." Rachel's eyes sparkled with understanding. "I get it. You don't owe them anything. Not an explanation, not a thing." Naomi gave a slow nod, feeling the weight of the day settle into her shoulders. But she wasn't weighed down. If anything, it was the feeling of liberation. "You know," Rachel continued, "this could be the start of something bigger. People need to hear stories like yours. The world needs to see that we won't just let them push us into the background anymore." Naomi considered that for a moment. She had always been the type to quietly make her mark in her professional life, but now, there was a fire inside her that couldn't be extinguished. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe it was time for something bigger. "I've been thinking about that," Naomi said. "It's not just about me. It's about all of us who are constantly being pushed out of spaces. It's about changing that. Reclaiming what's ours." Rachel smiled. "Exactly. This moment? It's just the beginning." The next few days after Naomi's encounter at the dealership were a blur. She was back in the office, filing papers, meeting clients, and navigating the usual legal challenges. But the feeling she had after her confrontation, of standing her ground, of claiming her space, lingered, simmering beneath the surface. Naomi couldn't shake the sense that her actions had sparked something, not just for herself, but for others as well. Her email inbox had been flooded with messages, some from friends, others from clients, and even a few from colleagues she hadn't spoken to in a while. Word of her moment at the dealership had spread fast, but it wasn't the kind of attention that made her uncomfortable. No, this was different. It was as if people were finally seeing what she had been talking about for years. "Naomi, I saw what happened at the dealership," a client named Melissa had written. "Thank you for standing up for all of us. You reminded me that I have a right to be where I am." Another email came from a former colleague, Kyle, who had worked in corporate law before switching to advocacy. He had been part of the circles Naomi had once moved in before she decided to chart her own course. "That was incredible, Naomi. I think you just ignited something. I'm with you." But it wasn't all supportive messages. Naomi was aware that some people felt uncomfortable with what had unfolded. They didn't want to acknowledge the discomfort that came with seeing a woman like her challenge the status quo. One email stood out, from a senior partner at her firm, Alex Palmer. "Alex, you've always been a great attorney, Naomi, but I'm concerned about the impact your actions might have on the firm's reputation. We can't afford to create unnecessary controversy." The word stung, but Naomi wasn't surprised. It was the kind of comment she'd expected from someone who still lived by the old rules. The rules that told people like her to keep quiet, to blend in, to play nice. Naomi, though, had outgrown those rules long ago. She didn't respond to Alex's email immediately. Instead, she closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the decision in front of her. The next steps she took weren't just about navigating her career. They were about carving out a future where people like her didn't have to apologize for taking up space. Later that day, Naomi received a call that would force her to confront what had been building ever since her encounter at the dealership. It was Rachel again. "Hey, I've been talking to a few people," Rachel said, her voice laced with excitement. "I think we need to make this public. You've got a platform, Naomi. People are talking about this." Naomi sat up straighter, her hand instinctively reaching for the pen on her desk, tapping it against her fingers as she thought about what Rachel was suggesting. "Make it public? You mean like, go on record?" Naomi asked. "Exactly. You're already getting the attention. Why not use it to start a conversation about what we go through every day? About the discrimination that's subtle but damaging. About the people who try to make us feel like we don't belong," Rachel said, her voice firm. "It's time to take this to the next level." Naomi felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had spent most of her career in the background, pushing forward quietly, letting her work speak for itself. The idea of making her experience public, of amplifying her story, was daunting. She wasn't afraid to speak the truth, but she knew the risks. The more visible she became, the more vulnerable she would be. But then Naomi thought of her clients, the ones who were still trying to climb the ladder, the ones who would never have the same opportunities she did. She thought of her younger sister, who faced challenges in a different way, but still faced them every day. Naomi couldn't keep quiet anymore. Not when her silence was an endorsement of the very system that had tried to hold her down. "All right, Rachel," Naomi said, her voice steady. "Let's do it." The next morning, Naomi sat in front of the camera in a local news studio, a professional backdrop behind her. She felt the weight of the moment settle into her shoulders, but there was a fire in her chest. This was her time to speak for those who hadn't been able to. The interviewer, a calm and polished woman named Jessica Grant, smiled at Naomi, but Naomi could see the curiosity in her eyes. "Naomi Greer, thank you for joining us today," Jessica said as the cameras started rolling. "I've seen your name in the news after a confrontation at a luxury car dealership here in Miami. Can you tell us about that moment and what led up to it?" Naomi took a deep breath, her mind steadying as she prepared to speak. She had nothing to hide. Nothing to apologize for. "I was in a luxury dealership, looking at a car," Naomi began, her voice calm but strong. "The salespeople didn't acknowledge me when I walked in. They ignored me, assuming I couldn't afford what they were selling. But I wasn't just there to buy a car. I was there to remind them that people like me have every right to be in spaces like that." Jessica nodded, but Naomi could tell the question was coming. She had prepared herself for it. "You said that you wanted to remind people that people like you belong in these spaces. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?" Jessica asked, her tone still neutral but probing. Naomi met her gaze, her shoulders squared. "I mean that too often, black professionals are underestimated. We're told we don't belong in certain places, like luxury dealerships, high-end restaurants, or even boardrooms. But we do. And if we don't push back when we're told otherwise, nothing changes. I've spent my entire career proving myself, but what I've realized is that I shouldn't have to prove anything to anyone." Jessica smiled softly. "You're absolutely right. Naomi, what do you hope people take away from your story?" Naomi's gaze hardened slightly, her voice growing even more resolute. "I want people to realize that the fight against discrimination isn't over. It's still happening, and it's still subtle. But it's up to us to challenge it. Every time we stand up, we make it easier for the next person to do the same." As the interview wrapped up, Naomi felt a sense of clarity she hadn't anticipated. She had spoken her truth, and now, there was no turning back. The interview aired later that evening, and Naomi's phone rang off the hook. The texts, the calls, the emails, everything was coming at her, and the world was paying attention. The days that followed Naomi's public interview felt like a roller coaster. The city buzzed with the conversation she had sparked. It wasn't just Miami. The story had spread beyond the local news, making its way into national outlets. The moment she'd shared on camera, standing firm against the salesman's prejudice, had struck a chord. But, as with all things that stir up change, it wasn't without its consequences. By the time she returned to her office the next day, she already knew things wouldn't be the same. There was an air of tension around her workplace that hadn't been there before. Her colleagues didn't quite look her in the eye as they passed her desk. Some were avoiding her altogether, while others offered hollow smiles that felt more like pity than support. Naomi's phone buzzed incessantly as she sat in her office, her gaze flickering between the ringing calls and the screen of her computer. A particular message caught her attention. It was from her boss, Alex Palmer. "Alex, Naomi, I saw your interview. This isn't what I had in mind. Let's talk." She stared at the message, feeling the weight of it. Alex had been the one who had raised concerns about the impact her actions might have on the firm's reputation. And here it was again, more insistent than ever. Naomi took a deep breath, trying to center herself before replying. "Naomi, I'm happy to talk, but I've been clear about my position. This isn't about making waves, it's about making change." She hit send, and then her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Rachel. "Rachel, you're being talked about everywhere. People are listening. Don't back down now." Naomi smiled despite the tension settling in her chest. She had made a choice, and even if it wasn't easy, it was the right one. Later that afternoon, Alex requested a meeting, and Naomi braced herself for whatever conversation would unfold. She couldn't avoid it anymore. As much as she had hoped for understanding, she had to face the reality that not everyone would see things her way. The meeting room felt colder than usual. Alex sat across from Naomi, a look of concern on his face, but his posture remained stiff, businesslike. "Naomi, I think you've made an impact, but at what cost?" Alex began, his tone a bit more reserved than usual. "I understand what you were trying to do, but this could affect our clients. Our brand." Naomi didn't flinch. She knew where this was headed. "Alex, this isn't about the brand. It's about people. If we keep silencing ourselves in the face of discrimination, we become part of the problem. You of all people know that." Alex sighed, rubbing his temple. "It's just, we're a prestigious firm. People come to us because of our reputation. We can't afford to alienate potential clients, especially those who are in positions of power." Naomi leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to alienate anyone. But I refuse to stay quiet when people of color, women, people who've been marginalized, are treated like they don't belong. That's the real threat to our reputation, maintaining the status quo." She could see the conflict in Alex's eyes. He was trying to hold on to his old way of thinking, to protect the firm. But Naomi wasn't asking him to change everything. She was asking him to consider the long-term consequences of remaining silent. "Naomi, I admire your passion," Alex said, his voice softer now. "But I think we need to be careful about how we go about this. Maybe there's a way to channel your message into something less confrontational." Naomi didn't back down. "I've been quiet for too long, Alex. For years, I've held my tongue, and I'm done pretending that the system works the way it should. This is bigger than one firm or one moment. It's about doing what's right, no matter the consequences." There was a long pause. Finally, Alex nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging as if a weight had been lifted. "All right," he said quietly. "I can't tell you how to handle this, Naomi. But know that you're not alone. Whatever you decide, we'll support you." The next few days were a mixture of tension and unexpected solidarity. Naomi received several calls and messages from people she hadn't expected to hear from. Her clients, many of whom had faced similar biases, expressed gratitude. They wanted to see her succeed, not just for herself but for them too. There was a quiet power in their words, an understanding that Naomi wasn't just fighting for her own seat at the table, but for theirs as well. At the same time, there were those who were openly critical. Naomi's social media pages were filled with comments from people who couldn't understand why she had gone public with her story. Some accused her of playing the race card, others called her divisive. But it didn't matter. For every critic, there was a voice of support, louder than the noise. She was reminded of why she'd done it in the first place, to stand up for herself and others who had been told they didn't belong. By the end of the week, Naomi's story had made its way into the op-ed sections of national publications. She'd been invited to speak at a major legal conference in New York, where the topic of racial discrimination in corporate America was on the agenda. It wasn't just a personal victory, it was a cultural shift, a conversation that needed to happen. When she stood in front of that crowd of fellow lawyers, business leaders, and activists, Naomi felt a sense of clarity. This was bigger than her. This was about changing the narrative, about showing the world that Black professionals didn't just deserve a seat at the table. They were integral to its success. The next chapter wasn't going to be easy, but it would be worth it. The sun had barely set, casting a warm orange hue over the city, as Naomi arrived at the prestigious New York legal conference. It was a far cry from the Miami streets she was used to, but the gravity of what she was about to do brought a familiar weight to her shoulders. This was more than just a speaking engagement. It was an opportunity to amplify her message, to reach a broader audience, and to change the conversation around racial bias in corporate America. The conference hall was buzzing with activity when Naomi stepped inside. It was a room full of powerful figures, high-powered lawyers, business moguls, and politicians, many of whom had been in the industry for decades. They had the resources to shape the future, to mold perceptions, and Naomi couldn't help but feel both out of place and perfectly in her element. She had earned her right to be here, just like any of them. As Naomi walked through the crowd, she noticed the looks, some subtle, some not so much. A few people recognized her from her interview, their eyes flickering with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Naomi kept her head high, walking with purpose toward the stage where she would soon speak. She wasn't just here to make a statement. She was here to force a reckoning. She took her seat backstage, the hum of the audience's conversations vibrating through the walls. A quiet buzz of anticipation filled the room as the host, a prominent corporate lawyer, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming, "today's session is about progress, about what it means to be truly inclusive in the business world. Our next speaker needs no introduction. She has become a leading voice in the fight against racial discrimination in corporate America, and her bold stand has sparked a much-needed dialogue across the country. Please welcome Naomi Greer." The applause was polite but measured, with a few claps more forceful than the rest. Naomi stood, her legs steady, heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. As she walked up to the stage, she was keenly aware of every eye on her. She could feel the weight of her message in her bones, like an electric current, charging her with an undeniable urgency. Once at the podium, Naomi took a deep breath and looked out over the crowd. The room fell into a hush, waiting for her to speak. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady but firm. "I've spent a lot of my life navigating spaces where I was the only one who looked like me. I've had to prove myself again and again, just to be seen as capable, as deserving. And I know I'm not alone in that." She paused, letting the words settle in the air, watching the faces in the crowd shift. "I am here today because I want to change that narrative. I want to change the conversation around diversity and inclusion, not just as a buzzword, but as a way of life. Too many of us are being overlooked, dismissed, or worse, ignored. For too long, people like me, Black professionals, women of color, have been asked to shrink ourselves to fit into spaces that were never meant for us. But we have a right to take up space. We have a right to demand respect." Naomi's eyes scanned the room, locking onto a few faces, some in the front row, others in the back. She could feel their skepticism, their defensiveness. But she didn't flinch. If anything, It made her resolve stronger. Last week, I walked into a luxury car dealership. I didn't walk in as Naomi Greer, the lawyer. I walked in as a black woman, a woman who was tired of being seen as less than simply because of how I looked. I didn't let them treat me as anything less than what I am, worthy of respect. The room was silent. Naomi could feel the tension, the discomfort. She was pushing them to confront something they had likely never truly considered. For some, this was uncomfortable, but for others, it was long overdue. I'm sure some of you are wondering why I'm standing here, challenging the status quo, Naomi continued. And the truth is simple. I want to make sure that my daughters, and every black girl growing up in this country, can walk into any room and know that they belong there. We're not just looking for a seat at the table anymore. We're ready to build our own. There was a brief moment of silence before Naomi felt a shift in the energy of the room. A few heads nodded, and she noticed a few hands clapping softly at first, and then more vigorously. It was subtle, but it was there. I'm asking each and every one of you, Naomi said, her voice growing in strength, to take a long, hard look at your own practices. At your companies, your institutions, your everyday interactions. Are we truly creating spaces for people like me, or are we just paying lip service to diversity and inclusion? The room was still, but Naomi could see that the conversation she had started was taking root. Some in the room were already shifting uncomfortably, others were reflective. She could feel the power of what she was doing. She ended with a simple yet powerful message: change doesn't happen when we stay silent. It happens when we speak up. It happens when we take action, when we refuse to accept the status quo. So I ask you, what are you going to do to make things right? The applause that followed wasn't just polite, it was real. The audience rose to their feet, and Naomi knew, in that moment, that her voice had been heard. It had been louder than the critics, more impactful than the doubters. She had started something, and there was no turning back now.